With me today is Richard Rattenbury. He is Curator of History at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. He's an Oklahoma Book Award finalist, and he's here to talk about his book, Hunting the American West, The Pursuit of Big Game for Life, Profit, and Sport, 1800 to 1900. And it's a Boone and Crockett Club publication, which we'll get to later. But Hunting the American West, you started out with what Indians did and ended up in essence with what lords and ladies from Europe and visitors from back east did.
Yeah, it's a very broad story, and certainly is most history a story of change, and this is a really transformative story in the American West. But it did start out with Native American subsistence hunters, and as time went on in the 19th century, they participated as well as Anglo-Americans in market hunting, which was basically hunting for commercial purposes, for profit. And then in the 1840s and on, sportsmen came into the West to hunt big game. You know, as the century wore on, it was a period of imperialism, and Englishmen and continental Europeans were hunting all over the world, in Africa and India, and in the American West as well. It was seen as a field for sportsmen to have some adventures, and they certainly did.
Now, are you a hunter yourself, or?
Well, I've hunted big game once when I was a resident in Wyoming, and I hunt pheasants occasionally, but I'm certainly not a big game hunter.
So you had to do a lot of research on the subject.
Yes, this was actually, the genesis of this was the project at the museum, installing the Joe Grandee Museum of the Frontier West. And what I tried to do in my interpretive storyline was bring in original quotations for the various peoples involved. And I found some really intriguing first-hand accounts of hunters in the American West for that portion of the gallery. And I thought, well, this is a subject matter that really hasn't been treated in this way, to draw together these various sources and voices and the artwork and the accoutrements and material culture in one book. And so I started pursuing these individuals, starting with Lewis and Clark and moving on from there, and found a really rich resource that the library at the museum and the Dickinson Research Center was continually buying more books at my bequest, and we were also buying a good many historical photographs, which you'll find throughout the book. But much of the bibliography in this book is supported by the collections at the Dickinson Research Center at the museum.
So you really didn't have to go very far to do most of your research?
Not too far. Now, on the illustrations, I did go quite far afield. In fact, all over, if you look at the acknowledgments section, there's probably 60 sources of images and artworks other than the museum involved. For instance, I wanted to get some of the original color imagery done by Alfred Jacob Miller when he went west with Stuart in the 1830s. And I got some original Catlin artwork from elsewhere as well, and he was also out there in the 1830s, and then moved on from there. Some of the photography also, the Denver Art Museum, of course, is a great source, and the Denver Public Library, the Western History Department there, was a great source of photography. One that's little known that I used quite a bit of was the Museum of Northwest Colorado, which has some collections of one particular photographer who began shooting wildlife in the 1890s out there. So I went far afield for some of the imagery, but we had a lot of it in-house as well.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things that struck me about the book, was the diversity of media that you've got in here. You've got some of the drawings by Native Americans. I think they're
right, ledger drawings.
Ledger
Absolutely.
drawings.
Those are from the Silberman collection at the museum, and that's quite a significant resource right there. And then we go into the illustrations of Carey and Remington and so forth. Even some period cartoons are scattered through the book, and from the illustrations then into lithography and into fine art in the paintings that were done, both of big game as portraits and also as hunting scenes and so forth.
So it's a book really that would interest people even who are not into hunting, because it in one way it's a history of the art of the portrayal of the
To an
West.
extent it is. There's a chapter devoted to the art of the chase, and the art is also, and photography is also scattered through the book, appropriate to the chronology. And I also cover the material culture as fully as possible, and one chapter is devoted to the arms of the chase. And there are a lot of fine arms which also are vehicles for art in many cases, because they're engraved with animal or chase scenes. So that the artwork is a portion of the story, certainly. But the big part of the story that I wanted to get was just the modes of hunting that we already mentioned, and how those were pursued by various peoples throughout the West over that 10 decades.
Now we have just a brief time, and I did say we would get back to the Boone and Crockett Club, because without them there wouldn't be the book. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, actually, of course, they're part of the last chapter on the rise of the hunter conservationists, and Theodore Roosevelt and the club were really the motive forces behind the conservation movement that we enjoy today, that has raised big game populations back from very low at around 1900. But a friend of mine suggested that I contact them, and I've always been fortunate in getting things published, it seems, and this was another serendipity. I sent them a proposal and a sample chapter, and they came back and said, we'd like to see the whole manuscript, and within about 9 months I was on board with them. And it's interesting, I'm the first person they've published who is not a club member.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I feel very humbled and pleased with that circumstance. They've been very great to work with.
Well, it is an absolutely stunning book. The depth of research impressed me very much. I was vaguely aware of a lot of these things happening in the West, but not that much, and I learned quite a bit.
Well, I appreciate it very much, and appreciate that you're having me on.
Well, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Richard Rattenbury has been here today talking about hunting the American West, the pursuit of big game for life, profit, and sport, 1800 to 1900. You can find it at your library and your favorite bookstore.